Hi everyone, this is Brian Hayes and welcome to episode 15 of the Music Mind podcast. Today my special guest is the wonderful Emily Gelineau, a fantastic young musician based out of Perth, Australia. Emily continues to push the boundaries of what's possible in a contemporary sense on a violin. Please enjoy my conversation with Emily Gelineau. Well, hi, Emily, and welcome to the Music Mind podcast. It's fantastic to have you here today as my special guest for episode 15 in the series.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Brian. I'm really excited to be here.
Fantastic. Now, our audience have just seen and heard a great arrangement that you did of Chick Corea's Got a Match. Can you tell us about, I suppose, the genesis of that recording, why that song, how you arranged it, and your memory of recording that particular tune?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was quite a while ago now. I think I recorded that in 2017, and Chick Corea was always a really huge inspiration for me because he kind of bridged my gap between being a classical musician and deciding to go and do jazz. I mean, I started doing gypsy jazz, which is, incredibly far away from Chick Corea. But when I started to do more research into jazz, uh, it was him that I was consistently listening to, and it was his compositions that made me truly inspired in this jazz fusion genre to kind of give it a go. So when I went to my university, when I went to Berklee, I actually auditioned with that song, Got a Match. And I believe that's what, helped secure me a place in there. And so when I was in my second semester at Berklee, I wanted to give that a recording at the studios with some of the most amazing musicians that I had met at that time. Look, I was young. I was about 18 when we recorded that. So when I look back now, it's a really happy memory, but it's also, really shows me how far I've come, how much I learned back then, and also how much I continue to love this music and continue to be inspired by artists such as Chick Corea, and how much I want to keep doing that in the future.
That's great. And look, if I had to sum up when I first saw that, one, I didn't think you'd be 18. I knew you're young and the whole band was young, but you've surprised me with that because that's very mature playing for an 18-year-old. And I think your colleagues in the band look about roughly the same age as you there.
So maximum of like 21, that we were all very young at that stage.
Really amazing. And one of the things I want to explore, I had the honour of interviewing a great German-based piano player, Simon Ausländer, in episode 6 in the series. And at the time I interviewed him, he was 24 years old and he was touring, recording and playing with Randy Brecker, who was 75, one of the absolute legends of jazz trumpet, the brother of Michael Brecker.
Amazing.
And I just, and in a way, our conversation today, I want to explore how you have got so mature in your playing at such a young age, the journey,
Yeah,
because we've got
sure.
some wonderful photos, and I might just throw up a couple now that you sent
Yeah, please
through
do.
of you
They're
of you when I think you must have been, what, 3 or 4 with
very
the
young.
violin, very young. And there's another one of you
Yeah,
starting your busking career with a wonderful little sign that says, "Hi, I'm Emily, I'm 5 years old, and I've been learning the violin for 1 year." But
yeah,
but even
yeah.
in those little photos, when I look at it, there's a determination in that little girl's face, as if, I'm going to
Mm,
nail this, is what I see in those photos, and
yeah.
and you certainly have. Let's go back to
Oh,
that
thank
got a
you.
match there for a minute. One of the things I really loved is the sound of the electric violin. Wow. I'm a multi-instrumentalist, but I've never touched a violin, never played a note on a violin. But having watched you play, particularly your 5 string, I believe it's a Yamaha violin. Can you
It's
tell
actually this one
that's that
right
there?
here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Can
yeah,
you
that's the one that I used.
can you tell us a bit about that? Because that has a
Yeah, of
gorgeous
course.
sound.
Of course. So it was very a special instrument to me because I was really into this whole 5 string notion. That's the thing that really got me into it because when you think about, for example, you're a saxophone player yourself. You think about the tenor saxophone or the alto saxophone. The range is just so great, and
Mm,
I think that the range is amazing with the violin. But getting that little bit of extra depth down a little bit lower actually just makes the sound feel much more rounded. And I felt that playing jazz on a 5 string violin, I was actually able to get those notes that a tenor saxophone might have. So thus I was able to play a little bit more music that felt natural to be down that low. So I guess that's the first thing that why I wanted to explore the 5 string. But
mm.
the Yamaha is really, really cool because they call it the silent violin, and it is. I mean, it's like an electric guitar in a way that if you play that with no amplification, obviously there's no body. So
Mm.
you're going to get a tiny bit of resonance from the strings, but you're not going to hear anything at all. So everything is coming through, obviously, the active pickup. And it means that you can really well manipulate the sound. And I loved it because I would often use pedals, especially for live performance, which meant that the sound was just so moldable. You didn't have to worry about any strange feedback issues that you do with the regular acoustic instruments.
Yes.
And it was just, one direct line that you could manipulate. So I will say that the raw sound of the violin is quite good, although it does require a lot of tweaking. And I did have a really great mixing engineer that I worked with on that and subsequent videos to get the sound right. But the great thing about the instrument is that it's easy to manipulate. Other
Yeah.
acoustic
Mm.
violins can be very hard to get a good recorded sound out of.
So does it have just a single bridge pickup on that? Like, is the pickup
It
under the bridge or part of the
It
bridge?
does, and actually, you can switch. So the entire body is kind of the pickup, the entire
Oh,
middle section of the body, but it
right.
also has a bridge pickup, and you can switch at the back. There's a little knob, and you can determine how much of the body and how much of the bridge pickup you want. So you can kind of mix and match. You can just have the bridge, you can just have the body, or you can have a little bit of both.
Well, my feedback is that is a fantastic sound. It is a very natural sound. It's sort of
Yeah,
like, and like you say, I think it's a low C string, is it? The deep
it
string?
is.
Yeah. So you,
Yeah,
you do get down into that, not the cello range, but I think
no,
in Got a Match, I think the final note you play at your solo, you can tell
mm,
you've went to that low string, and it's a gorgeous note. It doesn't suddenly sound like, oh, that's a different string, but it does add to that
exactly.
range. Now, I also saw one of the photos that you sent through. Do you have an acoustic version of that? A 5 string acoustic violin or
I
not?
do,
Yeah.
yeah. So this one here is this is the violin that I probably use every single gig at the moment because it's the most versatile. It is a semi-electric and acoustic, so it can be played acoustic and it sounds great.
Yes.
But there's a lot of internal wiring inside which goes to basically like a body pickup. It's kind of like a piezo pickup that you would have on top of the violin. Instead, it's actually inside, which means that
Inside it. Yeah.
you're not
Mm.
destroying any of the wood or anything like that.
Mm. Mm.
And yeah, this one's a 5 string. It's called the Realist violin that you can buy. It's predominantly made in the States, and so I bought it there.
Yeah.
And that is just it's a beautiful instrument.
Yes.
So you've basically got all the controls that you need if you want it to make it sound a little bit more bright or have a little bit more low end, depending on what
Mm.
you're doing. And that one also has the 5 string, the fifth string on it. And I find that for more acoustic jazz or gypsy jazz and Latin music. That instrument's a little bit more appropriate than the electric at this stage.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. So, what instruments, aside from your collection of interesting violins, and what is that? A mandolin, an 8 string ovation?
Yeah.
Is that a,
I know, right?
yeah?
It's cute.
What
It's an
is it?
eight
A
string
eight string?
ovation.
Yeah,
It's an
tuned
eight
to
string ovation.
a mandolin or something, is it? Or
It is, yeah, yep,
yeah,
tuned to a mandolin. And then this one over here is a 10-string Brazilian mandolin, which they call the bandolin. So
okay,
that one pretty much mirrors a 5-string violin. So that
yes.
one is like the 5-string, and that one's like the 4-string.
Okay, I got it. Yeah,
This
okay.
one has a lot bigger sound. Obviously, the ovation needs to be plugged in
Yes.
and
Yeah.
doesn't have as much acoustic sound, but
No,
this one is always meant to be used pretty much acoustically.
acoustically. So I've also seen, and we will look at a clip where you are playing piano. So are you
Mhm.
essentially a violin piano player? Is that your group of instruments essentially?
I'd say so, yeah. I started piano only about 2 years after I started learning the violin, and I learned both of them to an equal stage in my classical training.
Yes.
It was only when I became a little bit older and was more interested in contemporary music with the violin and went to uni that I really had to focus on one. I couldn't really
Yeah.
be able to do the two at the same time at a university level.
Yes.
And so I still play piano so much, and I still play for loads of gigs, but
Mm.
actually I'm looking to try to take some jazz lessons this year because for some unknown reason, I cannot transfer my jazz knowledge to the piano. I am
Yes.
just too classicized in that instrument. Even though I'm able to improvise on the violin and all that, just it doesn't work on the piano.
Does work on the
My hands
piano.
don't go the
No.
direction I want them to go. So,
But
yeah.
this is an interesting point because I do a lot of teaching and a lot of single note instrument teaching, but
Mm.
I come from a guitar background. I don't really play the piano. I can put a string line on or
Mm.
something like that. But I've always suggested to any student who is on a single note instrument to, at least go and buy a ukulele if you haven't got any money, because you can play all the
Yeah,
four-note chords on a ukulele for $30 or
you can.
$40. And until you've actually created the chord yourself on an instrument. So, if you're jamming and the chord C7th, what does C7 sound like? Yes, you can go dong, 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 dong on a violin or something. But do you agree that the piano's helped you in your jazz playing? Not, you've already said you don't play jazz on the piano, but in your improvisation, it must have been a help to you.
Absolutely. I mean, this brings up a really interesting conversation that I've had quite a few times because I would say traditionally when you learn, especially the violin from a classical context, even though you will get a lot of theory knowledge from it, you'll probably become an amazing sight reader. There's really very little knowledge to do with chords and to do with harmony that you pick up. And even when I teach the occasional student now, and mostly I teach them kind of bridging the gap between classical and contemporary music, I
Yeah.
urge them to think in their classical pieces about the harmony. And then they look at you like they've got no, it's just something that they've never really thought to do. And I guess when I was in that classical journey, I never thought to do that either. I never thought, oh, of course, all of these pieces are founded upon harmony. And
Mm.
essentially, Bach's harmony became jazz. Like it's exactly the same chord progressions.
Yes. Yes.
And so when talking about improvisation, I don't believe that you can improvise without a really solid knowledge of the chords and what works, what doesn't. I mean, it's all trial and error, right? If
Mm.
I love that Victor Wooden says if you play the wrong note, you're only a semitone away from the right one. So that's awesome. I love that.
Yes. Yeah, I think
But
that's great too. Yeah.
it really grounds your ear. And so I think the piano has always helped me with that. And like a lot of string players do, I do have perfect pitch, which I actually think in this jazz and chordal world limits me. I tend to hear individual notes. And
Yes.
then you kind of have to put them together in your brain. So that's something I've had to really relearn over time coming out of the classical tradition is to go, no, I'm not just hearing C, E, G, and B flat. I'm actually
Mm.
hearing the chord quality for what it is. And weirdly enough, that can actually be quite hard for people with perfect pitch. So there are
Yes.
many limitations to having it, and that is one. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's fantastic. That's an insight too, because my experience, I don't have perfect pitch, but I have met a couple of players who have, and that, like you, in the main, they have said that it's been a frustration more than a help in
Yeah.
many ways. It's great to
Mm.
hear a car horn and say, "Oh, that's D flat," but but
Yeah.
in a musical
I mean,
sense,
you know,
in a musical sense, I
yeah.
can understand it could be frustrating. Look, I want to play a clip now of you where it's a solo clip where you are playing the piano, multiple violins, and you're also sort of playing percussion on a little beatbox type thing. Can you tell us a little bit about this clip? Was this in a COVID lockdown period, or what? How did this one come about?
Yeah, it was. So to make a very long story short, as everyone feels about the C word there, the COVID.
Yeah.
I had moved back to Australia from the United States because everything was just very crazy over there. So I thought I'll come back for a very short amount of time, and obviously that extended itself, and I'm still here.
Yes.
But I decided to basically just keep myself busy with making some videos and enjoying that process, and experimenting on music that I really, really enjoyed. And this song, Nunu, is by Avishai Cohen, the bassist, not the trumpeter. And I have always loved his music because it bridges this gap between, I think it bridges the gap between classical and jazz, because the compositions he creates are so thorough and so through composed, yet the grooves and the odd meters, and obviously adding in those Middle Eastern elements. He's from Israel, and a bunch of world elements. It's really great. It's really awesome.
Let's have a look and a listen now to your arrangement of Nunu. Okay, Emily, great playing there, and a real good example. I encourage everyone that I come into touch with. I grew up in the 1960s, so the very first experience I had of recording was my dad's cassette player. And somehow I worked out if I got a matchstick and put it halfway on the record button, I could somehow or other multi-track myself on a mono cassette deck. And I have this vision as an 8-year-old guitarist double tracking myself on my father's. No doubt I wrecked his cassette machine, but I think that was a modern day example there of, I guess, in essence, multi-tracking yourself, including in video. And I really encourage people to do it. My experience has been, until you actually record yourself, and I'm interested in your feedback on this, you sort of have a false image of how you're sounding. That's what I've found. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. And you know what? I'm still terrified to listen to my performances or to listen to my recordings back, but it's the number one best thing to do. And even a recent example of a gig I had is that I realized I was getting into a bit of a habit of, I can't remember what type of music I was playing, maybe country music or something. And I was getting into a habit of like sliding into the notes quite a bit. Yes. And I thought it was cool on the gig. And then I listened back and I was like, oh no, like almost every single note is being slid into. That's probably overkill. And you don't realize those things until you listen back as an audience member.
Exactly. And nowadays, through the beauty of video recording, you know, I'll often say to people when I'm teaching a guitar, don't put your fingers closer to the frets, you know. And then I'll watch some of my YouTube clips and think, oh dear, I hope they don't watch me when I'm just playing. I'm just playing as I want to play. But it's a learning experience to see yourself and to hear yourself. So let's go right back to the beginning. You obviously took up the violin, at 3? Or tell me your journey. I know you eventually got to Berklee, but what happened in between your music journey?
Sure. Okay. We'll keep it short and sweet. Well, I started playing violin at 3.5, mostly because I was incredibly hyperactive and my mum needed something for me to do. And so I'm not entirely sure why the violin was the best choice to keep a very loud child quiet. Obviously, it's not the most pleasant thing to listen to. But
Yeah.
I learned classical, so I started doing classical, and I don't know why my family is not musical. I do not come from a musical family at all. Like no one is musical or has gone to university and studied that type of stuff before. But I just really took to it, and I seemed to be learning pretty quickly. And so about 2 years later, when I was 5, I went and learned the piano, and then I kind of just became obsessed with all instruments. I started busking at a young age, as you can see in that photo
Yep.
before. So I would busk in the streets, and it was a good way to get my confidence up, actually, and to not be shy performing in front of people. But I will say, as a young child, I didn't have any problems in confidence, and I was always a very confident and not a very shy kid. Um, and when I was about 10 years old, I actually got accepted into a school in London, the Yehudi Menuhin School for
Oh,
classical
wow.
performers. It was a boarding school. So I went over there for a little bit, spent a few weeks there, trialing it once I got in. But of course, that was also the year I think that the English budget, they had a budget crisis over there. It fell through early
Mm,
2000s, and it was just going to be way too expensive.
right.
So I came back to Perth. I went to high school, went to a really lovely high school, and yeah, continued to do music there. And it was there at that school that I met a beautiful Irish teacher who played the violin. And his mind was just completely far out of this classical zone and taught me things that I'd never thought about before. So we would sit transcribing Stefan Grappelli's solos on minor swing at lunchtime and things like that, or
Yes.
playing Irish jigs and Irish reels. And it was a real eye-opening experience to go, wow, there is so much more than just playing in the orchestra and playing Mozart or something like that. Not that there's anything wrong with it, and I love it, but I always knew that there was somewhere else to go with it. And I was doing a bunch of other stuff at the same time. A lot of musical theatre. I used to love performing in theatre shows and playing in the pits of musical theatre. I did that a lot. I think my first show I did when I was 11, and I was doing Into the Woods. It was Sondheim, so pretty challenging.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure who trusted me to do that at 11, but I'm thankful to them.
That's
Yeah, and then that's just kind of how it kept progressing. I didn't know where I wanted to go or what I wanted to do, and I just decided to audition for Berklee when they came to Sydney. And so I flew over to Sydney, got in, and went.
wow.
Yeah.
So did you, because music education is expensive no matter where you are, particularly
Oh, yeah.
the US dollar versus the Aussie dollar, did you get a scholarship or some financial help for that? Or how did the Berkeley dream actually happen?
Yeah, no, I got a full tuition scholarship, so I didn't pay anything except for my own living expenses whilst I was there.
Wow.
If I hadn't have gotten that, I would not have gone. I mean,
No.
the living expenses enough
Oh.
were just astronomical.
But that's a
The
credit.
school was very expensive.
That's a credit to you to get that scholarship. I heard you say a minute ago you weren't too sure what you wanted to do, but would I be right in saying that from a young age, maybe from a school age, you felt that
Mm,
music would be your life, or
yeah.
was it sort of a great interest there, but you were still thinking maybe I'll become a radiologist or a whatever, or was it always you knew one day you would make a career out of music? Was that it or not?
Do you know what it was? Is I always knew music was going to be part of my life, and I always knew I wanted to be a musician. But unfortunately, growing up here in Perth when I was younger, it didn't actually seem like a positive thing, and I didn't get many comments as to you can be a musician when you grow up. This is what you can do. These are the career paths. It was all like, oh, you're really good at it, and that's great. See what happens, maybe
Yeah.
try and get into an orchestra. So it wasn't very like,
Mm.
oh, wow, I'm not getting a lot of positive
Encourage.
responses as to being, yeah. And I have to say, look, my
Yeah.
parents were so supportive, and I was lucky to have them that were like, yeah, just go and do it, have fun. You're good at what
No.
you do. You work hard, but
Yeah.
yeah, from an external point of view, I thought about all sorts of things. I thought I was going to go to the Australian Defence Force and be in the Navy. All sorts of
Ah,
things
yeah.
I
All the things.
explored. And
Yes. Yes.
just because I didn't know that it
Yes.
was possible, probably until I was about 15, and I started to do my own research and look outside of the bubble of Perth and go,
Yes. Yeah.
it's possible. There's actually a
Well,
career path that's
well,
possible.
you're certainly proving that. I just want to touch on you. You mentioned Stefan Grappelli there before, and
Mm,
you play with a smile, literally. When you're playing, you are often just smiling. It's not a put on smile,
yeah.
but it's also your music is happy. I had the honor of seeing Stefan Grappelli play live in Brisbane would have been in the mid
Wow.
1990s. And it was only a couple of years before he passed away. And my memory of this is still as if it was yesterday. It was in the QPAC, the Queensland Performing Arts Centre, beautiful acoustic venue. And everyone got their tickets, and on the poster, of course, there'd be famous photos of Stefan, the big ticket posters and that. And we all sat down, and when he was announced, an assistant wheeled him out to the centre of the stage in a wheelchair. And there was an audible, I don't know how to describe it, but there was almost a sigh from the audience as if, oh my God, here's this very elderly, frail man. And in your mind, you're just thinking, is he going to be, can he still play? So his assistant, another assistant comes out, gives him his violin and his bow, and then we're into Lady Be Good. And if you close your eyes, it was the 20-year-old Stefan we were hearing. If you didn't look at him, because he looked like a very sick, frail man in a wheelchair, close your eyes, it's the Stefan Grappelli. Unbelievable, the smile in his music. And just to wrap it off, somewhere in the concert, they wheel Stefan over to the concert grand piano, and he does a set of, T for Two and just a whole other side of Stefan Grappelli. And I think I read somewhere that he actually, the violin was a second choice for him. He loved playing the piano. Is that what you've read? I've read that.
That's actually correct. Yeah, I mean, he learned the violin at a young age, and then he eventually went to playing into a big band where he was playing jazz piano. And it wasn't until he was in that big band and the leader of the band realized that violin was his actual first instrument and asked him to play it, and to give it a go in the band, that he decided, actually, this is kind of awesome.
I just want to play another clip of yours now, which is sort of a long way away from Stefan Grappelli. It is jazz, and it's Chromosome. Chromosome, your arrangement written Mike Stern, the great jazz guitarist.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about this? Because this, again, is very contemporary. This is, tell us a bit about how this one come about.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this was like in the era of Got a Match. I mean, I was just obsessed with everything fusion. I liked fast. I liked crazy. I mean, I didn't like too crazy, but this stuff was cool. It was challenging. It was fun. And in my very first semester at Berklee, we're all just jamming. We're all young, and I realized that other people also knew this song Chromosome, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've found my people. So it wasn't until a few semesters later, maybe a year or two later, that I actually put pen to paper, came up with the arrangement, had rehearsals with the band, and some of those band members I am still such close friends with. The bassist is from Australia, and actually the guitarist as well. And we talk all the time now that they're back in Australia. And that was it was a really great experience to record that song. It was something that I'd always loved from even being a late teenager. So being able to put that to actual fruition was amazing.
Okay, let's have a look and a listen to Chromosome. talk about Berklee a little bit more? Because Berklee really is the mecca of the music colleges. I guess if you've got a jazz side to you, what is it really like? You read about that it being sort of jam central and all that sort of stuff. So what the actual
Yeah.
course you took on there, what was it? What was the degree you took on?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, I don't know if a lot of people know this about Berklee, but when you enter into Berklee, you don't enter into a major. You spend about a year or maybe even 2 years undeclared, is what they say, and you're just doing core music courses that you need to do, and then you declare your major.
Okay.
So yeah, unlike pretty much any other university where you are going to do that program, you
Mm.
all come in as like just the same, and then you choose. And so when I chose, I decided to do a double major of violin performance and film scoring. So that's the two that I did together. And the violin performance, I mean, that was unlike any other university I could really hope for, because it wasn't rooted in one genre. It was just general, and that's what all of the instrumental performance was. You had the ability to choose what you wanted to focus on. So if you wanted to do jazz, great, you would take those classes in those ensembles. If the next semester or the next term you wanted to do bluegrass, you could do that. You could study with all sorts of different teachers. You could even study with a teacher who didn't play your instrument. And I did that a few times. And that was
Okay.
invaluable,
Yeah.
studying from a guitarist or a saxophone player,
Mm.
because you don't necessarily need to be playing the same instrument in order to learn a lot of valuable information about improvisation or playing stylistically or any of that type of thing. Yeah, so that's what I spent those, I suppose, 4 years doing.
Okay, so that's very interesting, and certainly that's great intel. And what a good
Mm.
idea, because when you go to that, you really don't know necessarily what you want to do. And what a great
No.
way to find out, to spend a couple of years,
Mm.
like you're saying, doing the core subjects that you'd have to do anyway. With the
Yeah.
violin stuff, so did you mix and match a lot, or did you focus on jazz, or what did you do when you did the violin major?
I did everything. I said yes to everything. It was probably a mistake. I mean, jazz was always what I loved. So the majority of the ensembles that I did was always, I think I did a Yellow Jackets ensemble. I did a Return to Forever Mahavishnu, John Luke Ponty type of thing. I took it just a straight ahead jazz. I studied with a gypsy jazz violinist. But along that, I also took, I spent a semester doing Middle Eastern music. I also did, R&B, smooth jazz, Latin jazz. It was amazing what the violin could be included in. And I also managed to be a little bit sneaky and find ensembles that the violin may have not necessarily been a recommended instrument for, but just sneak it in there anyway. The Yellow Jackets, that didn't have a violin in the
No,
ensemble, but I managed, with my absolute love of that band,
yes,
to sneak
yes,
myself into that ensemble, and it was
yeah.
possibly the best I've ever had, the best
Oh,
time.
yeah, Bob Mitzer and that
Yes.
groups are legendary. And it's interesting
Oh,
that you said that you deliberately put yourself in a place where the violin normally wouldn't be. Now, a number of the tracks we've heard today, I think you could sum that up. Like there was Jean-Luc Ponty, and then, you're not the
mm,
first person to play electric violin, but it's
no.
very rare. And I think in those arrangements you've done, the violin, now that you have shown what it can do in that, is the perfect instrument at that point in time for those tracks, to me. I think if that was replaced by a trombone or a trumpet or a squealing electric guitar, it would lose something. So you also said film music. You spent a major amount of time in film music. There's a photo on your website where you're standing in front of what looks like certainly $1 million solid state Logic desk, a 96 track. Was that part of what you learnt in Berklee, the recording side, or was it how far did it take you in the realm of film music?
Pretty far. I actually had a conversation yesterday with a fellow composer here in Perth about it, but the film scoring course in there was just so comprehensive, because it's more than just composing. And it's more than just being a mixer or a producer as well. It's all of those things combined. If I want to sum it up, it was really 50%, 20%, 25% composing, 25% orchestration, 25% of actual, production skills, and then mixing your own and conducting and getting it recorded in a live studio. So that desk that you saw there was actually one of the desks at the big scoring stage in Berklee that we
Wow.
had the privilege to record our projects on with a live orchestra. And that really just sets you up for life. All the skills that I've learned are just not just applicable to film music, but also can be applicable to anything. I mean, the majority of my work these days is a lot of arranging. I do a lot of arranging for orchestras, for cruise ship entertainers, all that type of thing, and also making backing tracks, things like that. And all of those skills can be taken over, even if they're not directly being applied to film or TV.
There's a great photo of you, and we'll put it up too, of conducting. Now that's a
Yeah,
that's a skill in itself. And
yeah,
I had the honour of interviewing Robin A. Smith, who regularly conducts and arranges for the London Philharmonic, and
that's amazing.
he talked. It was wonderful. I said to him, "What's it like standing in front of the London Symphony Orchestra with your little baton?" And he explained it that he sort of said it's crazy in some respects because so much music nowadays is played to a click track because of the linking to the film. So he said he sort of thinks it's almost a charade. What's the conductor doing up there when everyone's click, click,
Yeah,
click? But he said he had the experience where he's at a recording session with the London Symphony and they announce just, 5 minutes before, Rob, we're doing this one without a click track.
mm,
And he's thinking, OMG,
yeah,
I have got 100 musicians in front of me. They're at
yeah.
Abbey Road, I think.
Oh
Yeah,
gosh.
and he's just thinking, I got to get this right. But what he said is, when you get it right, the way he said it was so good. He said it can be the most exhilarating experience in your life, or if it goes horrendously wrong, it's the exact opposite. So,
Yeah.
what just think of the times where you've had to conduct, whether it's a smaller a group or not. What has been your experience? What do you feel like? Do you feel like you've got the power of that group in your hand, or does it feel? Tell me what's your experience as a conductor?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done as much conducting as I would love, but the thing about, especially being at the university, is that conducting was actually compulsory for every single student to do at least one or two levels of it.
Wow, good.
And so everyone had to study it, which was really cool. And especially when it comes to film music and recording your own music, I mean, that is something that happens all the time, that you as a composer will be required to conduct your own music. It's
Yeah.
very rare unless you're an absolute, massive hotshot conductor that you can get someone else to do it for you. But it's
Yes.
mostly because you know the music that you have written so well.
Yes.
And it's kind of like what you said about the wonderful man that you interviewed is you do kind of feel like a glorified metronome a little bit, but
Mm.
the role of a conductor in that sense is actually to give feeling, it's to give emotion, and to lead more than anything. Without the conductor and without someone there in between takes, for example, to say, look, that was great, but I think the violins need to be a little bit softer, and I
Yeah.
think the trumpets, you can really come out at that moment.
Yes.
It's not giving what it needs, and so it's someone to really to give feedback and say what needs to be done rather than just keeping the beat. The
And
role
that's
is so much huger than that.
and that's what Robin said. In the case of the click track, his job is to be part of the emotional content
Mm,
of that music. He's in there really to
mm-hmm.
drive the emotion of it, not to be
Yeah.
the human metronome. You sent me a video of, and for our international audience, like I think every country, there's a version of The Bachelor in
I
every
know this is a
country.
funny one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is, and I've got no interest in Beck's love life, but
Neither
it
do I.
sounded like you. Tell us about this. You had the
Yeah.
opportunity to score some music for the Australian version of The Bachelor. Talk about this one.
Yeah, so basically this happened before COVID and actually started when I was over in the States, where I was writing the music for a documentary about the fires that had been happening during 2020. And it was with actually a Brisbane-based director and producer. And I wanted to send you that, but unfortunately the documentary is like 1 hour long. So I was like,
Oh
might
yeah,
be a little bit long to,
yeah,
to
yeah,
pop
yeah,
on, for
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah, yeah,
podcast.
yeah. No, that's fine. That's fine.
But
Yeah.
um, but from that, he was working on the Warner Brothers The Bachelor in 2020 and had let me know that there was an opportunity for me to submit a little bit of music for this new cue that they were writing and for
Right.
this new scene for this new incomer.
Yeah.
And usually with reality TV these days, you don't get composers to write on the spot. I mean, I'm pretty sure MasterChef has been one of those only reality TV shows where they've actually had composers work on the series as a full.
Yeah.
But usually these days they use library music unless there's something that they think needs a little bit of extra care and a little bit of extra attention. So I
Yes.
was lucky enough to work on that. And I think only a small piece of that whole entire segment did end up getting aired. It wasn't the entire
No.
bit. They obviously
No.
do a lot of cuts as they get to
Yes.
the end of the the TV shows. But it was an amazing experience and something also very different because it's not very typical film, but it was a bit more realistic, a little bit more applying to less of a fictionalized story and more documentary feeling. Yeah, so it was a
So,
fun experience.
so on the soundtrack, there's piano and violin. Is the process there, did they send you like the video? You knew what you were playing to? You could see it as you were playing, or what's that process?
Yeah, so the process is that you'll always receive a cut, whatever cut it might not be the final cut, but you will receive a cut of the video. And from there, I usually watch it a few times and I usually just try to get a feel for the emotion first. That's the most important thing. And then from there to kind of start, I usually sit at the piano, just an acoustic or an upright piano and just play along and see what feels right, see what doesn't feel right. And that pretty much starts the draft process. I would do everything on piano and then from there go, well, that really would sound fantastic on guitar at that moment. Or, sometimes you may not ever use the piano as an instrument at all, but it's just, I think, the best tool
To
in order to
compose.
get compositional ideas out because you can get melody and harmony.
Okay, let's have a bit of a look, and we'll just have a look at a short section of Beck's role in The Bachelor here in Australia.
Hey Lockie, I hear from the west. I'm sitting here on the east catching the most unreal sunrises. I hope one day we can catch a really great sunset together over there. I'm pretty carefree. Everyone that knows me knows that I don't really fuss too much about the small things in life. It's always like the most important things that matter. I love to laugh. If you can make me laugh, that is a very good thing, but honestly it doesn't take me much to laugh. I find everything pretty funny. On the outside, I think I look like a real girly girl, but on the inside, I'm tough as nails and have always been that badass. I'm definitely a rule breaker. I hate rules. I'm looking for someone that just loves life and just loves adventure and wants to, make the most of their days and never waste a single one. I think the way that Lockie carries himself, he's really cool, calm and collected all the time, and he's, really confident in himself. I think it takes a really strong person to achieve the things that he has, and it takes a really strong-minded person to do the things that he does. He's a beast from what I've seen. I mean, I feel like you're always at risk of falling. Yeah, I mean, I hope he's the one. That'd be pretty good. But we'll have to wait and see, and see how we are when we're actually together in person.
So, Emily, reading music versus playing without music. As a musician, the music mind, you started out being trained classically, which is literally reading. That's what you do. First of all, how did you learn to read music? How was that taught to you?
Oh my God, I'm actually not sure if I know. I mean, I started playing Suzuki,
Yeah.
and weirdly enough, with Suzuki, it was kind of this dual focus on listening and reading the music at the same time. But from my memory, and I guess from what my parents have told me as well, from observing my lessons, is that I always liked to read music and I picked it up relatively quickly. For whatever reason that might be, I'm not entirely sure. I did a lot of theory lessons and also I just did it a lot. I mean, I actually was homeschooled in primary school and all I did was music. That was pretty much it. And I was a bit of ahead of my academic time, not when I was older, but when I was younger, sure.
Yeah.
And I guess I just did it all the time. And that's what I say to anyone that's wanting to learn to read music quickly or to sight read, is just to do it all of the time and just to immerse yourself in that. And I think it's an amazing skill. And I do think that my sight reading and the ability to read music has helped tremendously through everything. I mean, especially being a one-noted instrument.
Yes.
It's pretty imperative that you do, and to be able to do it fast and quick
Yep.
It's really a gift. However, I learned that it was holding me back in a lot of ways that, especially when it came to playing more contemporary music, because I was always scared about my memory. Even playing classical music, my number one thing was, am I going to remember the music? Am I going to forget it when I get up on stage? And I realized that for people and for those that are learning music by ear, you kind of cut out the middleman. You cut out the reading of the music, then to the brain to remember it.
Yes.
You're listening and it's going straight into the brain and you're pretty much memorizing it instantly. All you have to
Mm.
do is play it a few times, but you're cutting out that piece of paper.
Yes.
Whereas I do find that what happens with a lot of musicians that only objectively read music
Mm.
is that it's there on paper, it's there in the fingers, but it's not really sometimes always there because you haven't heard it and you haven't gone, oh, okay, that's exactly what it sounds like. I'm going to replicate that. You're just playing what is on the sheet sometimes.
I often equate it to the person who's sitting outside in a community orchestra. They're playing Happy Birthday. They've got the notes for Happy Birthday in front of them, Happy Birthday. Gust of wind comes. Can't finish Happy Birthday. The whole
They don't know
world,
what to
the
do.
whole world is screaming to you. Yeah, but that is true, and
Yes.
it is a would be, I think, a terrorizing feeling, as if I need, even though I can physically play that, I'm
Yeah.
waiting for someone to tell me what to play. You and me are on the same wavelength. You summed it up beautifully
Yeah.
there. I always say, and I'm interested in getting this from you. I always say to people, try and look at the music you've got as a picture, not as 500 notes to ping off one at a time. And in other
Mm.
words, try and look at it as if there's a tree, there's a dog, and there's a cat. I know a tree, a dog, and
Mm.
a cat. I can recognize those. And
Yeah.
sort of try and convert that picture, admittedly bar by bar or line by line, into a sound in your head. Because as you said, if you've learned to play from a sound in your head, well, there's just that one other step of your eyes have to become involved, but not in this ridiculous, that's a C, that's a D flat, that's an F sharp, that's a G double flat, not this
Yeah.
incredible note by note mathematical, I got that note, I hope I don't get that other note. Just look and say,
Yeah.
what the heck does that sound like? What do
Yeah.
those notes sound like? Do you subscribe to the idea of seeing music potentially as a picture and converting that picture into sound?
So sometimes, yeah. I mean, sometimes when I read music, at this point it gets quite fast that you can just kind of look where the line is going and go, oh yeah, I see how it's going. Obviously getting the individual notes
Yes,
correctly, but
yes.
you no longer need to go note by note by note. You're able to actually step back a little bit and look and go, oh yes, okay, I can see how that goes. Um, and I do think that it's a positive and a negative. I think everyone should learn to read music, and to a certain degree, you don't have to be the fastest sight reader
No,
in the world.
no.
But also, I think for those that are particularly good at sight reading or do pretty much only play music by reading, I would encourage them to do the opposite and just go and listen and see. You often find that your ear is a lot better than you think, even if it's a simple melody that you can hear, or you're trying to learn your piece by listening to it,
Yes,
you're just going to pick up so many other nuances from the music, and potentially someone else is playing and someone else. So you can't get that from just it being written. You
no.
can't hear all of those things, and you can't get the emotion and the phrasing and all that type of stuff.
You're a great improviser, got a great freedom, and you play, as I said, with that beautiful smile. But you're not ignorant to the fact that you can sit in with the West Australian Symphony Orchestra and you can read the music and don't turn up with your electric violin or your five stringer.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
walk in with
Yeah.
and keep sort of to keep both camps happy in an authentic
Yeah.
way. You should be really proud of that, Emily, because that's a good party trick. That
Thanks.
that really is rare to find someone who can sit on the fence and say, I can appreciate both of those. I've got the skills, I can do it. But I was just interested, you talked about your reading music.
Mm,
Where did this ability to
mm.
just freely play come from? Was it really studied, or was it a natural part of a natural gift, do you think?
I do think it's really going to depend on the person. I mean, the Suzuki method, I think it works for some and it doesn't work for others. It's
Okay.
just like anything, it works for some people, works for others. I do think that a natural gift, I'm not entirely sure, but I always loved discovering. And I know when it came to music that I just wasn't the person to just look at the song that my teacher was telling me to do and just do that and turn up the next week and have just done that.
Yeah.
There was some sort of fire and there was some sort of discovery that I loved doing. I mean, it was very nerdy, mind you, very early version of Sibelius, probably at 10 years old, trying to arrange Eine kleine Nachtmusik for saxophone and flute and all sorts of. I was incredibly nerdy, but I think it was that discovery and that constant listening and that constant wondering and going, oh, but if it could be like that, I think I remember the first time I was practicing piano and I was practicing Bach and I just decided to swing it. And I was like, that sounds jazzy if I play it like that.
And Bach would
I think it was
applaud you.
discovery.
Bach
Yeah,
would
maybe,
applaud you.
hopefully.
Well, I think
My
it's like,
teacher didn't.
finally someone is doing something with my music other than just doing what I really think those guys, I'm not a classical musician. It's not something that's ever been of interest to me, but I'm absolutely sure that the Beethovens and the Bachs of their time, they were the improvisers. It just became someone wrote out that cool solo Bach did.
Yes.
And for the next 200 or 300 years, everyone is reading note for note. But I'm sure at the time, a lot of that stuff, the boys were just having fun. I wonder what happens if I play that chord.
Just on that, I tell this to my students all the time, is that improvisation is just composition. And so composition is just like a slower form of improvisation. They were just making it up and then they decided to put pen to paper, right? And then once you tell that, they're like, oh, right, that seems a lot more achievable, seems a lot more attainable. Yeah. A lot of that music back in the classical time was written for dancing. It was improvised on the spot. It was basically whatever the court wanted them to do.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Same as today.
I agree. Now, somewhere in our recent conversation, you mentioned that there is that thing of being scared, or people can get scared if you've got all these notes. I just want to touch briefly on this concept of stage fright, whatever you want to call it. There are some very, very famous musicians who spent their whole career sort of cobbled with the burden of stage fright. Performing for a lot of people is like the nightmare of doing a speech at your friend's wedding. You've never done a public speech and you are terrified. Tell us about your take on it.
Of course. I think it's a very interesting and very personalized to everyone. I will say that luckily I have always been really good with actual performances and getting up in front of people. It's something that's never bothered me. It's something I like doing and I feel a lot of excitement. However, having said that, through my younger years when I would compete in competitions classically, I was terrified. I wasn't terrified about the performance. I was terrified of making a mistake. I was terrified of forgetting the music. My hands would get sweaty. I would stand up there and I would just kind of wait until it was done and hope to God that I would get through it. So I think it was more a fear of doing well rather than a fear of those out there. And I would say because I started to perform from such a young age, I mean, busking on the street, that's probably where the confidence grew and I started to feel quite okay with doing that in public. However, now, I do get shy from time to time. I've never particularly liked when, I don't know, you go to a party and a piano's there and someone's like, just get on and play a song. I'd rather do anything but do that. That just sounds awful to me. I really, I don't know. I've never been that one to just be able to turn up and go, let's jam. I feel very, very awkward sometimes and shy about that. But in terms of like being on a stage, I've never really felt that pressure except for just feeling nervous that you hope you do a really good job.
So for someone, and that's interesting, and I sort of expected that would be your answer because you're a very outgoing person. You've got some wonderful videos on Instagram and that where you're just, jamming at the local restaurant, having a ball.
Oh, yeah.
But it's a thing that I don't think is talked about enough because a lot of people secretly try to deal with that and at the same time make a career as a performer. And it can lead to an awkward path of, drugs and alcohol and all that sort of stuff to try and deal with. If there was someone watching this today who really is struggling with it, you're someone who isn't, what would be your best bit of advice? What would you say to them to try and get some help or to deal with it? What would you recommend?
Absolutely. I mean, first things first is you never want to put yourself in a situation that makes you seriously, direly uncomfortable. Obviously, that's not the situation to be put in. However, if it's something that you do love and you're just trying to overcome that hurdle, I would say that baby steps is pretty much the only way to do it. So to start off with a small audience or to start off with just playing that one song at a friend's gig or something that doesn't feel like it's all your pressure. Jams are a really great way to start, and however, it does feel incredibly hard at first, and I particularly hate it, to be quite honest. Once you push through that initial awkwardness of going to a jam, you'll realize that everyone is just there for the same reason, and no one cares. No one cares if you can do that or you can do this, and the whole restaurant, they're not there to listen to you. You're just an added extra. I would also say playing things that make you comfortable. I realized once I stopped playing classical music that was actually making me very terrified to play it on stage in front of people and started playing the music that I enjoyed. I felt a lot more confident about myself and a lot more confident about my playing. That may not be the answer to all of the problems, but I think slow immersion and little baby steps and, realizing as well when you've maybe pushed yourself a little bit too far is okay as well. It's okay to take a step back and go, that was enough.
That's fantastic advice. Real good common sense advice. Talking about classical music, what's your involvement with the Perth Symphony Orchestra? You said you do some arranging. Do you actually regularly sit in with them? Or tell us a bit about what is that current association?
Yeah, well, actually, funnily enough, I actually worked at the Perth Symphony Orchestra for 3 years, and I've just left at the end of last year, and I worked there as artistic planning associate, where I would assist the creative director in planning the concerts, booking the artists, coming up with creative ideas, commissioning arrangements, and all sorts of stuff. So that was a great job for me when I came back from COVID, and I had graduated uni and didn't really know what I was doing back in Australia. And I was able to launch into some really amazing work with PSO. So I thank them for that. And so through that, I was able to perform with them. So I do perform regularly. Something I like about the Perth Symphony Orchestra is that they really bend the line between contemporary and classical, which is amazing. And I would say the majority of their concerts are contemporary. It's mostly for the community rather than, being in the concert hall and playing a Beethoven concerto.
Yes.
So a lot of the music that is played is things that the community that might feel a little bit intimidated by a classical orchestra will actually love to listen to. And it's a good way to involve them.
Right.
But I also do a lot of arranging for them. Again, mostly contemporary and popular music for upcoming concerts. May that be In Excess, Taylor Swift, and it could be full symphony, a smaller iteration. It can be all sorts of different ensembles. But I love the flexibility that they have, and I love the work that they're doing. It's really great.
That is fantastic. In fact, you sent over My Heart Will Go On, that I believe you arranged for the symphony.
Yeah.
How many musicians is that for, roughly?
I believe that was for 62. Yeah, 62-piece symphony. So pretty huge.
Yeah. And this clip, where was this recorded? This was one of their pop concerts or something, was it? Or
yeah, so this was 2 years ago for Perth Festival at Rockingham. It was called Symphony Under the Stars, and it was part of the Perth Festival program in 2022. And the theme was the Catalpa Rescue, which was an important thing in WA history. I can't completely remember it all, to be honest, but it was, I think, celebrating 100 years of that time in WA history. And yeah, it was a really amazing concert.
This is your arrangement of My Heart Will Go On. Let's have a look and a listen.
Wherever
Okay, Emily, that's fantastic. That's a whole different string on your bow. That the ability to arrange for, in that case, 62 musicians
Mm.
is just a wonderful skill. And I think you're a great evidence that there are many ways you can build a career in music. You don't have to be the world's number one contemporary jazz violin player. I know you'd probably want to be, or maybe not, because there's the pressure. And I'll just tell a very quick story that I remember reading an interview or whatever about the late, great Don Burrows and George Gola, the
Mm.
great jazz players. A famous American clarinet player came out to tour Australia around Easter time, Eddie Daniels. And at that time, Eddie Daniels was rated probably the number one jazz clarinet player in America. And Don
Mm.
and George did a bit of a tour with him. So come to Easter time, the 4-day long Easter weekend. And Eddie says to Don, "What are you doing over the Easter break?" Don said, "I'll go on fishing." And Eddie said, "Really?" He said, "I'm going to be in my hotel room practicing. You saying you're not going to touch your instruments over?" "Yeah, I'm going fishing." And I think he was just shocked that, because Don in his prime was as good as anyone in the world on all of those instruments. And Eddie's thinking that he would go home like him and just practice to stay number one. But I think I like to tell that story because we can fall into the trap. It can be a trap if your focus is to be the best in the world, in Eddie's case, on clarinet, because he has got 100 little vultures circling him, wanting to get that top spot. Don led a wonderful life, happy, played as good as anyone, but I thought that was good. I'm going fishing for the Easter weekend. And I think that balance. Have you got any thoughts on that? The balance of the
Oh,
importance.
gee.
Yeah, tell us a bit of not falling into the trap, the little rat race trap of, I need to clock up 15 hours practice because someone else will do 16 and they'll get me. Talk a little bit about that, because I think it's important.
I've struggled my entire life with this, like, keep going. I mean, I think I've always identified as being just a giant overachiever, and also just really put a lot of pressure into, like, you must say yes, you must be busy all the time, and to be classed as a really good musician, you just must be busy 100% of the time and keep going and going. And it's just really not the case. And I've really felt that in the last few years. And I think it's one of the reasons I decided to stay in Australia rather than returning back to the USA, because the life over there was a really hustle, 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 say yes to everything for, honestly, not a lot of wage. You
Mm.
don't get a lot of money in return for that. It's a bit of a harder life. And here I saw that I was able to kind of combine a little bit more of just having a really lovely, peaceful life at the same time. And you need that. I mean, the creative juices don't flow unless you're able to actually take a little bit of time off and say, just enjoy a Saturday afternoon to, I don't know, go for a walk in the park or have a watch of a movie or something like that. But I guess for a lot of young musicians, especially in this day and age where being busy is kind of over glamorized and it's seen as something that you should be doing, it's very hard to break out of that mold.
We can't go without touching on the 2022 Grammy Award for Best Instrumental Arrangement category. Now, that's the 8-bit big band in New York, is it? Tell us about that. That's a wonderful thing to be part of that achievement.
It was some of the best times. And you know what? This was all by accident as well. And that's why sometimes you can't control things that happen. You get lucky, or it's just a mistake, or it's an accident, and things happen and you don't know how they did. And this is one of those. I suppose one of my friends, it was when I was in the States, one of my friends sent something on Instagram to me and they said, look, a band that I know, or a guy that I know in New York, is looking for an extra violinist for a recording session tomorrow in New York. They're really desperate. And of course, me being a very young, naive 18-year-old that was like, sure, I'll go to New York. It's only 4 hours away. I
That's
said
right.
yes. And I said,
Yeah.
I'll come down. I have nothing else to do. And I'm glad I said yes to that.
Yeah.
Sometimes saying yes is good, but just
Yes. Yeah.
balance it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I went down and we recorded. It was terrifying. I knew nobody. I mean, being in New York alone as well, taking the bus, some interesting stories there, that's for
Oh,
sure.
yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
terrifying.
Yeah.
And we went to the Power Station Studios. I
Yep.
think they were formerly called Avatar Studios in New York.
Yep.
And we recorded a live rescore of the Super Mario Bros. Game. So basically, this amazing arranger and leader of the band, Charlie Rosen, had played the Super Mario's game.
Yep.
And whatever had happened in the game that he played, he had scored for that. So, of course, if he lost, the orchestra would play that. So it was live scoring the game that he was playing, which was just the coolest thing ever.
Oh,
And it was one of the best afternoons of my life. I mean, I was meeting fellow New York City violinists and string players that were doing exactly what I wanted to do, that came from this similar tradition as me, but was doing something different with it, something very
yeah.
contemporary, something very different. And that video went on to have probably almost 1 million views. And so I kept recording with them for a while, going down to New York. They would come up to Boston. I became really good friends with Charlie. And eventually I got this email that they had submitted one of their albums that I had recorded on for the Grammy Awards in 2022, I think.
Yeah.
And it just turns out that one of the songs won in the Best Arrangement category. Actually, I have it here. I don't actually have the trophy, but they give you like this certificate-looking
Oh,
thing that has
wow.
it
Yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
it's pretty official. I mean, I didn't do anything in terms of the actual arranging, but because I was a musician on that, you
Yeah.
end up with one of these cool little bad
Well,
boys. So
that's
yeah,
something
it's pretty great.
that's something to be really proud of. You are comparatively very young with your whole life ahead of you to do whatever you want to do in music. And we're going to finish with, I love the track Inertia. But before that,
Mm.
I want to give you the opportunity, firstly, to tell the audience what your website is so that I don't get your name pronunciation right.
Of
So if
course.
you can just spell that out for them,
Yeah.
what is your website?
Yeah, sure. It's at emilygelino.com, and Gelineau is spelled Gelineau.
Great.
So if you look that up on Google, it's probably going to come up as one of the first things or so.
And it's a great website. I encourage people to go to that. You've got a lot of good
Yeah.
content. You've got yourself at the highest level there, but you've also got yourself just having fun, just out there
Yeah.
playing. And I think that's so important. Are there any projects that you've got on the go at the moment that you might just want to share with the audience, might be of interest to the audience?
Yeah, I mean, in a few weeks' time, I'll be presenting one of my first Fringe Festival shows here in Perth, which is called Tea for Two, a tribute to Stefan Grappelli. So I'm
Right.
really excited to bring that to the Ellington Jazz Club in Perth and have my Fringe debut. I've played in lots of other Fringe shows, but I've never actually presented my own, and it's something I've been thinking of for a while. And to really get that Hot Club of France feeling back in that old gypsy jazz style. So I'm very excited to do that in the next few weeks. And then I'm doing a lot of embarking on overseas travel this year, and will be continuing to, as I've started doing a little bit of cruise ship work as a guest entertainer, working on board a few international and also Australia local cruises as a violinist. And
Great.
as I probably don't want to be doing that work for the rest of my life, it is a wonderful way to see the world. It is a great way to again show people what a violin is capable of. Show them the type of music that I love. I usually present two shows, one that's a little bit more French jazzy and one that's a little bit more contemporary. And I'm really excited to do a little bit more work with that. So I'll be overseas for a good portion of this year.
You should be really proud of what you are doing. Particularly, I think, for young women, there's not that many. If you're a saxophone player, there's 1,000 guys who've had, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
David Sanborn or Tom Scott or Charlie Parker, there's role models, good, bad, and ugly, that you can pick from. But I think women in general, there's not that many. People seem to,
No.
they do their music through the school years, and as soon as school's over, they've got to get a real job. I think
Yeah.
you're a wonderful example of someone who you're finding your own way to get your own version of a real job.
Yeah.
And you play with a smile. It's really wonderful. We're going to finish on Inertia. Tell us a little bit about that track.
Yeah, Inertia was my very first composition in the jazz, actually, probably my first jazz composition ever. So it was a bit more jazz fusion, and I wrote it when I was living in Spain at a campus that Berklee had in Valencia, and I lived there for a few months. And that's when I loved playing jazz fusion music, but I decided also that I loved composing it. And so that was my very first composition, and it was recorded there at the studio at Berklee Valencia in Spain, with some of the best people as well. And I mean, everything to do with music is the people that you meet. And so a lot of these videos for me is just capturing those friendships and those memories of meeting such incredible people along the way.
And what an important point to end on, to capture the moments, because these videos are priceless. You'll look back in 30 years' time and say, hey, I was playing good then. I'm playing better now. But how good was that? And it is great.
Yeah.
So here's Inertia. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian.
Bye for now.
See you later.
What an amazing story Emily has to tell. She's only just starting out in her life in music, yet she's already a Grammy Award winner, a composer and arranger for major symphony orchestras, a graduate from one of the most prestigious music universities in the world. She comfortably bridges the difficult gap between classical, jazz, pop and contemporary music. As always, I invited Emily to contribute on a collaboration video with me as host and guest, just sharing their love of music. Emily chose one of the most enduring melodies in the history of music, composed by Erroll Garner in 1954. Erroll could neither read or write music on paper, yet his beautiful melody, Misty, has truly survived the test of time. I got to share that melody with Emily's amazing acoustic violin playing, and I joined her on alto sax. Please enjoy our version of Misty. Bye.